Today's quickie is the Nash range quiz, in particular calling ranges. I have a previous video on the Nash equilibrium, so check that out if you're less familiar with it. I'm going to go ahead and type in various common scenarios into Wiz, and then we're going to automatically pull up the Nash results, and we're going to quiz ourselves. So I don't know exactly which situations I'm going to pull up, so while I have an idea, I'm going to quiz myself as well, and by all means pause the video and see what you guys think. So we can pretty much ignore the Wiz ranges for this and come up with what we think the Nash ranges are. So in a situation like this, as you can imagine, in equilibrium, the small blind is going to be shoving quite a bit wider than 24%. And I would say here we're going to be calling with a range of roughly any ace, any pair, any Broadway hand, and mid-suited kings or better. So let's go ahead and pull that up. And what we see here is that the small blind is shoving 66%, so that's actually the first result. A lot of players default to shoving any two in a spot like this, and against a fellow reg where the Nash analysis is best, he's going to be calling you wide enough where you should not be shoving any two cards. In terms of our own calling range, any ace and a pair, like I said, but the king's actually down to king deuce suited, so if you are playing against a wide shoving reg, that's a spot where I gave a range that was a bit too tight. So we look them up quite wide. Now the next modification is we can switch to having the button be the shover, which is pretty easy to do in Wiz. And in this situation, we're obviously going to narrow our calling range. And so in this spot, I'm going to say that we're calling with actually fairly close to the range that Wiz puts up, only a bit wider. So we would go roughly pocket fours, ace eight, and for the Broadways, Queen Jack suited, so approximately that range. Let's go ahead and pull that up. And we see that in fact the button is shoving just under 40% of hands, including some of these semi-bluffing hands, and we are looking them up with almost any pair, any suited ace, roughly the Broadway hands that I mentioned, and with aces all the way down to ace 5 offsuit, which is going to seem like a loose call. One thing that we'll also see, of course, is that this is still a nine-handed situation, and these ranges will change as we get fewer players. We're going to repeat this now with the cutoff and then move on to a different number of players left and stack dynamic. And one of the reasons we're not going to use the Nash analysis as much for early and mid position is because generally these ranges are going to work best when playing against regs. In other words, you're often going to choose more exploitive ranges based on what your opponents, how you believe they're actually going to be playing compared to the unexploitable Nash ranges. So generally in late position against fellow regs is going to be where these ranges shine the most. So now we have a cutoff shove, and the question is what hands do we call them with? And of course we're going to tighten some more, and this time we'll see that we call him with roughly fives, ace 10, and for the Broadway hands, maybe king queen and king jack suited. So let's pull that up. And we see that actually, so again, this is the cutoff shove, and when we are the only caller, everybody else is full to us after a shove, it's again wider than I estimated. So we do call with the king queen, but down to threes is a call. And part of the reason why it's going to be wider like this is, again, we're assuming a cutoff who's playing shoving as wide as he should, and you may absolutely want to call tighter than this when you're playing against an opponent who is not going to be shoving, you believe, the Nash ranges. In particular, most players who aren't are going to be shoving tighter than this, which would tighten your calling range correspondingly. And also because with a lot of players left, we're going to be closer to chip EV than we're going to be with the higher ICM techs in bubble and near bubble situations.